Namaste and in la catch, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, and you're probably anticipating it if you've watched the other shows, Namaste comes from the Sanskrit, spoken it's Brahmi, and it means I acknowledge the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. In la catch comes from the other side of the world, the Mayan culture, and it means I am another you. So imagine if you could just be in that place and how you recognize and greet others along your path every day, what kind of difference that might make to you, to others, and possibly even to the world. Just think about that for a moment. All right, so this week's guest is Clive Elliott. He's a barrister originally from South Africa, and he immigrated to, actually grew up in apartheid times. He immigrated to New Zealand about 40 years ago, and he became he's ranked as the Chambers and Partners of New Zealand's top IP barristers. He's a TEDx speaker, artist, and author of the book, The Power of Well-Being. Clive, glad to have you here.
Yes, thank you, Zen. It's a great pleasure.
All right, so let's just jump right in. You know, your book title, The Power of Well-Being, that speaks to me in that at some point there was this acknowledgement, recognition, awareness of something beyond the physical, and perhaps even for lack of a better, some kind of spiritual awakening or at least a realization that you had.
Yes.
When did that occur and what was it like?
Well, the book really occurred as a result of a particular event in New Zealand, which got me thinking. But before that, I suppose my awakening was a slow one, and it took time. And I've travelled a lot and read a lot, and it was a gradual, I suppose, spiritual awakening, and to look at the world and to say, is it well, or if it's not well, why isn't it well, and is there anything I can do personally to make it a better place?
You know, that's a wonderful endeavor, and I've learned that, you know, I had a spiritual awakening very young at 18, and which was unique, to say the least. The psychiatrist that I saw afterwards, that my parents had me visit, very wonderful, listened, was attentive, and offered some great feedback. But he did say, you know, he couldn't understand why I was so young. He said most people don't go through it until their mid-40s. If they ever do. Yes. So that kind of gave me this understanding, and yet, okay, what's the mid-40s? And then when I reached my mid-40s, oh, it's empty nesters and career changes, or, you know, yes, things of that nature. So is that kind of what happened with you?
Yes, it was a gradual process, and I think the reason that it really came to a head was with this terrorist event in New Zealand. And one of the reasons that I love New Zealand is it's a small, remote, and very peaceful country, and we simply didn't have events like that. A mass shooting where 50 people were shot in a mosque. Mm-hmm. It was just unheard of in this country, and it really shocked me, and it shocked a lot of New Zealanders as well.
I think it shocked really, anybody if it, you know, yeah, wherever it occurred.
Yes, and that really made me think, you know, I think things are not good, and can I do anything to make them better? And it was really that event that I suppose was the trigger for my spiritual awakening, if we can call it that.
So how did that evolve from there?
Well, it evolved from when the event occurred. There was a great outpouring of sympathy for the people who had been shot, and the whole of New Zealand really gathered around the Muslim community and said that you are entitled to go to your mosque on a Friday and pray in peace without being shot with an automatic weapon. And so there was a great deal of sympathy, and there was also a realization that we had to cut back or cut down on automatic weapons, and there was legislation passed very quickly. With an amnesty to hand in those type of automatic weapons. So there was action at a wider level. But in my case, I felt that I needed to try and understand why the world seemed to be dysfunctional at the moment, and to try and actually find the root of that.
And so in that exploration, were there a few things that you discovered, or was there one kind of central theme that was the crux of the matter?
I think that the way that I looked at it is I identified what I thought were the problems with society, and I set about investigating them and researching the issues, and then looking for solutions. And the story is actually much bigger than that, because what I thought I would do is look at a country that always came out ahead when you looked at issues like happiness and people being satisfied with their lives. And Finland is that country, not New Zealand. So I actually traveled to Finland, and I was going to write a book about Finland and New Zealand, and to compare them, because they're at other ends of the world. They have no real connection, but they're very similar in a way. And I actually wrote that book, and then I thought I needed to compare it to a large democracy like the US, because the US is really the beacon for the rest of the free world in so many ways. So I thought I'd compare two small countries and a big country, and then analyze the problems and the potential solutions.
Yeah, kind of do a sampling of the population to see what's there, and to see. I know. Speaking of seeing, I know you're looking at me in your monitor and not the camera, so that might be a little disconcerting to guests. But if you could, so with that sampling, what did you find?
Well, what I did was I interviewed a lot of thought leaders in both countries, and that's it's politicians, it's economists, it's people who are interested in society, and I then wrote the book, and went to a publisher, but I also hired a researcher, a political science major at one of our top universities, and she researched the book for 2 years. So I had a lot of background research, and if you look at my book, there's a lot of footnotes, and there's a lot of data behind it. So it's research based. And I went to a publisher, and the publisher said, "You've taken on too much. The topic's too big. Why don't you just focus on New Zealand and the US?" And that's eventually what I did. So I left Finland for another day, and focused on a big economy and a big country and a small country, and compared them.
Now, in this process, and as you're looking at more the data-driven kind of information, and gathering and researching and synthesizing and making your comparisons and the response to that in your sharing, what was going on inside of you during this process? We don't often talk about what's going on inside, and maybe it's a reticence, maybe we don't really know. One of the things I learned years ago, and it was edified recently, in that we live half inside and half outside.
Yes. So
what do you find in that comparison, if we may explore that for just a moment?
Yes, well, I think that what I suppose I was finding is that I had a particular viewpoint on society and how society functioned, and my personal my personal philosophy is I'm a private, inward-looking person, probably an introvert by nature, but I think a lot, and I read a lot. So it was really a question of, I suppose, exploring what I could offer to other people based on my own intuition and research. And so I suppose it was a process of opening myself up to the rest of the world, to say, this is what I think, and there it is, for better or worse. And I suppose any artist takes a great personal risk when they you know, paint a painting and then exhibit it, and people look at it and they may hate it. That people don't realize how personal that is, you know, to actually put yourself out there. So I think in a way I have exposed myself to the world, which is not my natural inclination. You may find that strange, because I mean, I'm a barrister, I'm a court lawyer who makes my living standing up and arguing. But that's a very different process to actually exposing your inner.
Absolutely, because that has facts, figures, documentation, rules of order, you know, protocols and presentation, and all those kinds of things that are part of that whole scenario. And you're right, it is much different than being able to talk about what's going on inside of you. That can be a pretty frightening place for most people, especially the introverted, because you don't want to appear silly, foolish, ignorant, or, you know, out of touch. And yet, the more I listen to those people who do learn how to speak up, even overcoming their introversion, there's quality there, there's wisdom, there's awareness. And you mentioned earlier, you know, you think a lot. Have you ever heard of the term thetan, T-H-E-T-A-N?
No.
It's a Greek word, and it means thinker.
Okay.
And one of the, I looked up the word Satan in the university library. I was in a pre-med program early life, and was compelled to go look this up just to see what the dictionary said, right? Because I needed more than one source. And in the dictionary, the very first reference was to thetan, which was Greek, and it meant thinker. Well, that makes so much more sense, that we overthink things, and we're our own worst enemies in that regard in some cases, unless we think about those inner promptings that we get that roll out into practical applications, like you've found in the work that you've done with your book. So acknowledging that process, and you kind of hinted a little bit about that, were there sensations of revelation that came as you were studying the details and pondering them, wondering what to do with it? Were there activities in your head that came about as a result of that?
Yes, there were. What really came through to me was two things: humanity and humanism. I realized in that process that what I am is I'm a humanist, and I care about people, and I care about humanity, and about the planet we live in. And to me, that is the most important thing, is that the world, and I see you've got a globe behind in your background. If we don't protect the environment we live in, we don't exist any longer. Humanity will disappear. And I've become a very strong climate change activist as a result of that. And I believe that we have to protect the environment, and we have to protect humanity, and that means protecting the weak amongst us.
Absolutely.
That is where I've really come to, and I believe that the power of well-being is really a humanist exposition of how humanity can get ahead.
and being able, kind of like the background, being able to step back and take a wide angle view, or even an off-planet view, to think about, okay, how can we see things more clearly of what's happening? And I mentioned the global peace movement that I'm involved with, and the
Yes.
executive director now, Live and Let Live. You know, the whole notion behind that is to be able to do away with aggression, which
Yes.
is what affects those weak people
Yes.
that you talked about, because they're being aggressed on and don't know what to do about it.
Yes.
And at the same time, there's the other aspect of being a better human.
Yes.
And acting that way towards each other.
Yes.
Which we can all do better in those realms, or at least
Yes.
most of us can. There are a few who are doing things stellarly, and you know, I acknowledge that. And yet there's so much more that we can be doing.
Yes.
And you stepped up with the book to offer those kinds of things. And I like how you mentioned, you know, the reciprocity, subsidiarity, and
Yes.
trust.
Yes.
So reciprocity kind of has a known meaning. What is it? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's a very powerful concept, reciprocity, because it really goes to the whole underlying contract that society has, because it represents treating each other in a fair and reasonable way and respectful way, and reciprocity is working right now. I'm treating you with respect and you treating me with respect. Now, if you were to say, well, I'm going to change tack, I'm going to attack Clive. I think he's talking a load of rubbish. That's not reciprocity as far as I'm concerned. Well, what that is
aggression.
It's aggression, and you're not treating me the way that I would like you to treat me, and vice versa. I treat you with respect. Now, I think that when you look at societies, when you can take it on a macro view, and when a country like Russia invades Ukraine, that is not treating the Ukrainian people with reciprocity, because the Russians wouldn't like the Ukrainians to do the same to them. So
no, and yet there's a lot. My awareness, my wife's from St. Petersburg, and there's an awareness that we do not know about of the history and what happened up to that point. And so the mainstream media has taken that single event and focused on it, rather than what led up to it. And I think that's poor journalism in my perspective. Now, so not knowing that, it's hard to really, this is where, you know, we look for confirmation bias, right? We have opinions on things, even though we're nowhere close to what's happening, and all we're getting is information fed to us about it. And I think that's a disservice for our own intelligence, first of all, and that it doesn't give space for just looking at, kind of like, you know, we were talking earlier, taking the off-planet view and just looking at the big picture of what's happening, so that we can really understand the history, first of all, which kind of gives relevance to the present, even though, you know, when we look in the past or the future, we're not able to be in the present. However, most of us are like that, and our present is affected by those two extremes, because being in the present mostly is kind of a challenge to be, right? A good one, and yet it's a difficult one, because we're conditioned to think about the past and the future. And
no, look, I'll accept that, but I suppose let me think of another example. I suppose that if you have a group of people who in society who have advantage and have privilege, and there are other people who are a minority and are disadvantaged and are always behind the eight ball, then reciprocity is when you have the opportunity to help one of those disadvantaged, you do so because you would like to think, if you were the one at the other end, that they would do that to you. So I think it's really just a very, it's people.
Well, it's a golden rule, right? It's do unto
rule.
others and as you would have them do unto you. That's the same philosophy of live and let live, only it's
That's
a little
right.
more
Yes.
lively in
Yes.
that perspective. So I really, I agree with you. Reciprocity it's an integral factor in being a better human.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
so the subsidiarity.
Yeah, it's a subsidiarity is
Subsidiary.
actually, so yes, it's
Okay.
it's as in subsidiary. It's actually a religious concept. The funny thing about it is that it's actually a concept that arose in the Catholic Church, and the philosophy is that you delegate to the lowest level of ability in the church hierarchy, so that the Pope doesn't hold church services. He delegates that to a priest, or the priest in the local church delegates the cake running of the cake sale to a group of parishioners. He doesn't do it. So you delegate as low as you can.
Yeah.
So
and there's structures like that in everything, or organizations, corporations, companies, governments, all that kinds of things. And it reminds me of a wise man I mentor who at one point said to me, why should you be doing well what you shouldn't be doing at all?
yes.
Right? So this gives way to the priorities that are in place and the service that needs to be done and the level that happens at.
Yes, 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 and I think it's an important concept in terms of well-being, because one of the issues is government. You know, to what extent should government be involved in looking after people and making sure that they have social security and that there's a safety net? And I know that this is a very contentious issue.
Sure.
Because you know, and as Ronald Reagan,
well, should they have the right to tell you what to put into your body?
Yes.
Or how to treat your body? I don't think so.
That's right.
That's aggression.
Yes. So subsidiarity says, the principle says, well, not government's role to tell you what to do and to tell you what to do with your money. That should be delegated. That should be delegated down to the people that genuinely need help. Should be able to administer that help in the way that they choose, as long as there's some ability to monitor that it's been done properly. So it basically says government needs to stay out of people's lives. So I think it's a really important principle that just because central government does have to tax people, and that tax money has to be used for roads and hospitals, and so that's critical. But the question is, where's the line drawn?
Right. We're going to take your money and give it over here, even though you may not want us to. You know,
yes.
Again, that's another form of aggression. But I like it, and I think what I heard you saying amidst that was that even issues need to be handled at the lowest level possible.
That's right. Yeah.
Which would mean the local community.
The local community,
state or a nation.
That's right. Or family. So the family unit and the extended family unit is really the key here, and that's where you need to get the support services to. And as long as they're getting there in the form that they needed and in a timely manner, that is the way you develop well-being in local communities.
Mm-hmm. So the next term we were looking at was trust. And that's a huge word.
It's a huge
depending
word.
on the level that you take it to.
Yes, it's a huge word, but it's I think the most important word in the book. It's the glue that holds society together, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
Because
and trade accentuates that.
Yes.
Open trade, you do business well with another, and your relationship's built on trust. Otherwise, why are you going to do business?
Exactly. And It's the same way that my reputation is built on trust. As a lawyer, if I say to a colleague of mine, I will do that, or the money's good, my client will pay, or if I say to a judge, my client will do this by tomorrow, I only do that if I have clear instructions, and the judge will trust me for that. The judge will say, fine, I'm happy to take your word for it. And you just have to break that trust once, and you're finished.
Now, is this, speaking of trust, so there's an assumed, and then there's a built, right?
Yes.
And in the courtroom, because of your stature in it, there's an assumed trust because this is who you are and what you do.
Yes.
Now, how about the earned trust? How do you see that evolving in people in general, and specifically in the realms that you're wanting to address?
I think earned trust is an integral part of the process, because I think trust is trust is similar to reputation in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Reputation can only be earned. You don't just get a reputation. You earn it over time, and I think that it's long in the earning and very quick in the losing. You just have to make one mistake, and people say, "Well, we can't trust that guy."
Not very forgiving, now are we?
No, we're not. But that's also based on I suppose pragmatism. We deal with the people we can trust, and we avoid those we can't.
Right. But do we allow for people to make honest mistakes, or to, we're all infallible humans.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So how do we acknowledge that? And yeah, sure, there's dings and trust, depending on the event, right? And how untrustworthy it was. How do we restore that, or learn how to forgive the other in some way?
No, I see your point. I think forgiveness is important, and I think second chances are important. I think I've got colleagues who don't give second chances in the work we do, and I think that's extreme.
Oh, especially in the trial positions.
Yeah, because
there's no second chances there. There's appeals.
Yes, that's right. And I think people do make mistakes and need a chance to repair what they've done. So I think the important thing is, one of the thoughts that I've got that I'd like to talk to you today, if there's time, is really to talk about what I sort of call the center. The middle. It's the middle class. It's people in the centrists.
I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah.
First, though, I want to take that same trust and I want to flip it.
Yes.
What's it like internally, right? So I know each one of us has a conscience. Sometimes it shows up as a voice. Sometimes it shows up as a feeling somewhere in the body, or a sensation.
Yes.
Right? How do you have those inner promptings, that still small voice that some call it, and do you trust it, or have you second guessed it and then learned how to trust it over time?
I think
I know that goes that kind of in, and I hope I'm not being aggressive into your introversion, but I want to draw that out, and because people all the time are having this kind of dilemma in what's going on inside of them and how the outer world looks in comparison.
Yes, I think it's a very good question. Personally, I believe it's very important to have to have parameters that you adhere to at a personal level, and those parameters are the ability to judge between right and wrong, and to act appropriately and honorably to yourself and to others.
Now, is that an intellectual process for you, or is there a visceral experience of that? And the reason I asked that is I had another mentor. His name was Kai D, and you may be familiar with the original Hawaii Five-0 series. He played Wo Fat, and he actually had a doctorate in theology and ran he was the rector for a Taoist sanctuary here in Tempe. And he said to me one day, in the Taoist way, there's really only two things: what's desirable and what's undesirable.
Yes.
Now, that would seem to elude a visceral recognition of what's desirable and what's not.
Yes.
Is that something that you go through in some respect?
Yeah, it is. I think that's a good way of putting it. It is a visceral. It's something you internalize at some point in your life, and I think that if you have a strong sense of right and wrong, I think it's something that informs every decision you make, and I think it is. I think it is more visceral than theoretical. I think it's something that it's like teaching ethics in law. I always say anyone who can quote me the rules of professional practice is someone to be careful about. Now I say that rather flippantly because I don't actually know the rules of professional ethics, and I don't read the rules, but I know what is right and wrong as a lawyer. I know if something's dodgy, or if something is crossing a line, and if necessary, I will look at the rules and say, well, how far can I go? So I think it's something you either sense as a human being, or you don't. And so some people seem to have difficulty working out what is desirable or undesirable.
Sure, sure. I wonder sometimes, though, it is, because every human being, and it's my understanding that we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into these forms, just unaware of the magnitude of our own being and consciousness. Yes. However, in that, there's this reticence to go inward, to get in touch with feelings, with sensations, because as guys, right, the male gender is taught, don't go there.
No.
Right? We need to be stalwart, never show our emotions, always be present and do the right thing. Well, we still have those sensations and things. We just don't necessarily allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to share them.
Yes.
And I think that may be a part of what's happening. And I see some of that in your book.
Yes.
Right, where we're looking at this a little deeper. And how do we connect with that inner knowing that seems to be all pervasive and available, and yet we tend to kind of second guess it?
Yes. We do. I think that I do write about that in the book about toxic masculinity, because personally I think it is a big problem and certainly in my society, which is it's a frontier society. The same as America. We broke the country. And we're a farming nation. We play a lot of sport, and rugby is it's a hard game.
It is.
And the attitude amongst a lot of men, and traditionally more so than now, is, well, if you've got a problem, harden up, mate. Not interested in your tears. And so
don't deal with it. Just harden up and not necessarily ignore it, but just bull your way through it instead of stepping back, again, taking a bigger picture view and saying, okay, why is this happening? How can I work with it better? How can I respond in a way that I actually feel good about rather than something that I regret?
Yes.
Right. Which is usually what you end up in court about. Right. So how, I know there's this sense within people, but how do we move beyond? How do you see or recommend moving beyond that reticence to a place of looking for knowledge and understanding?
I think the key thing is to reach out and to not internalize your concerns. And I think that what we have to do is we have to forget about being hard. We need to actually accept that sometimes a feminine approach to things is actually appropriate. And we all have feminine in us, and I think we need to accept that.
So is it actually feminine or just a denied masculine trait that we've never accepted? Because they're feelings, but whether they're, we tend to allude that emotions are feminine, and yet we feel them. And there's a lot of study and research, and we've got to have labels and categories and things like that in order to understand things better. And I suppose it's easier to understand an emotional framework from a feminine perspective. However, there are those feelings and senses and sensations that men have. And again, like you mentioned earlier, we're taught to just kind of block it and then just move on, move through it.
Yes. Yeah, well, I think feminine might be a clumsy way of describing it.
It works, though. I'm not aggressive. I'm just saying, it's interesting how we use these terms and we ascribe definitions to them that kind of avoid the reality that we're both having the same thing go on inside of us. So why do we differentiate?
I think that it's possibly my own personal experience is that my mother was a guiding light for me in terms of who I am today, rather than my father, who was a very, very reticent and very much a man of his time.
Mm-hmm.
He went to the Second World War at 18, and he didn't express himself very well, and so I suppose in a way my mother guided me in a way that I realize now.
Is there any kind of education or system or way that we are taught young how to feel and sense and emote appropriately? I'm not, we don't get that in our educational system.
No, definitely. I think male role models are so important, and I think the modern male role model is someone who hugs his kids and supports them in the areas that my mother supported me rather than my father, because he didn't know how to discuss it with me.
Sure.
And so I think attitudes have changed, and my father-in-law is the same. So I think it's a generational issue. I think today we're far better at dealing with these emotions and making our kids, well-rounded and good people in all respects.
Right. And the upcoming generations are much more expressive and rather raw in how they think and feel.
Yes,
definitely. Which, in the generational mix in the workplace, you've got usually 4 different generations that have to work with each other or learn how to, because most of them, they're side by side in some cases, and at least they're dealing with each other during the day. So these kinds of generational differences, not just cultural, but in like we were talking about, the older generations, my parents, your parents, the male was stoic.
Yes.
And the woman took care of the kids and nurtured them. And so there was this setup. And then, in new generations, they both begin to kind of work with each other until you get to the, dual income bracket, where the kids aren't being raised by their parents, somebody else is doing it.
Yeah.
And then you have the next generation where there's, more of the almost house husbandry.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's very common today. And yeah, I should say we don't have kids. My wife and I, we don't have kids, but we've got, an extended family. And so I don't speak with great experience about the younger generations, but there are Gen Zers and, in my chambers that I work with, and they are very different, and for the better, I think.
I agree, and in their ability to be more expressive, they don't feel so diminished by others for saying how they feel.
Yeah,
and others are more accepting of that. I've got 4 kids and 9 grandkids and 6 great grandkids at this point. Yes. And unfortunately, I don't have much relationship with them because of some things that happened, divorce and whatnot. And yet I taught high school for almost a decade so that I can keep up with them.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It gave me that opportunity to understand what they were going through, talk to others their age, and kind of get a feel for what they might be going through, so that if the opportunity came up, I might be able to assist in some way.
Yeah.
And occasionally that happened. Right?
Yes.
And yet there's this more of a global view of how there's like a new breed of children that seem to have much more sensitivity, not just to their emotions, but to the things that were previously deemed unseen or unknowable or indistinguishable from reality, kind of like magic, right?
Yes.
But these kids have much more sensitivity and are able to see, sense, and feel at greater levels than what we were able to do.
Yeah.
Now, maybe we had something to do in helping that along in some way, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And yet, how does this affect the being of wellness?
Yeah,
or the power of well-being. I'll put it that
way. Of achieving wellness. Well, I think that my basic thesis is that we need to get beyond just getting by, and that's subsistence and existing. That it's very important that we do have a home, we live in a safe environment, and all of that, and we have a good education. But what we want to do is see people actually thriving and getting ahead in life and reaching the higher planes of achievement, and we can only do that if people have the opportunity to flourish. And that's,
exactly. And it seems, it seems like we have a lack of mentality. We have a scarcity mentality that's kind of being thrust on us through media narratives and movies and things of that nature, news stories. And yet it would seem that with the land still not being used, with the technology that we have, the distribution systems and those types of things that are really very good at doing what they're doing, that sense of lack or scarcity is contrived. And then projected, and that's what we've accepted. Now, what you're talking about is going the opposite direction. And starting from that place of knowing that somewhere there's an abundance of what we're looking for.
There is an abundance, but we also have to protect what we have in terms of the environment. We can't just keep expecting the environment to give. So it's a balance, and we need to preserve as well as expand opportunity, and that's hard. But it means we have to make choices about that. We have to stop burning coal, and we have to develop hydro and wind power.
It's still going to be difficult to retrofit how many millions, if not billions, of fossil fuel powered vehicles. Right. That's a huge challenge. And also, and granted, certainly not helping the environment.
Yeah.
But we also don't necessarily take into consideration that there's a pole shift going on. And I believe that the North Pole has shifted something in the neighborhood of several hundred miles over the last few decades. And so in doing this, you've got one side of the polar ice cap that's melting, one side that's freezing. And so that alone is going to cause some climatic change.
Yeah.
Of at least, and we're only experiencing a degree or so. Right?
Yeah.
So that's got something to do with it too. Again, stepping back, looking at the big picture, right? However, there are those things, as you mentioned, that we can do in order to minimize or mitigate the effect that we've been having. Not that we intended to do so, because I'm sure when the gasoline engine was first invented, they weren't thinking that this was going to be devastating to the environment eventually. And so, but these kinds of things, we're innovative and creative. We can do those, and maybe there'll be some ways to figure out how to, change the engines around a little bit, and maybe put a hydrogen generator on the vehicle, or run it on water. Right? So that technology does exist.
But we've got to act quickly on that. But I think that there is an ability to get ahead and give people opportunity. But we do also have to look at birth rates. Can we have population just blowing out indefinitely? I don't think we can. I think the world can only sustain so many people, and eventually there's going to be a tipping point. So I think
there has been some adjustment towards that. Some of the cultures that were, used to 8 to 10 are now to 2 or 3. Because of the efforts that have been made to educate and make them aware and give them the tools to do so, right? Whether it be birth control or contraceptives and things of that nature, which is a great stride forward.
But in the developing world, it was common to have large families because you expected a number of your children to die. So if you can educate people that you're not going to lose half of your kids, 3 is a good number, 10 is a bad number, but that takes re-education.
Quite a bit. Now, you began talking about a central theme that you wanted to address.
Let's go back to that. Just about the center and I suppose the moderate, hardworking middle class. I think that they're really the core of society, in my view, because they are under pressure from both sides, from the entitled and the disentitled, and the hardworking, law-abiding, tax-paying middle class are really important to the stability of society. And I think that they are the ones who are civically minded and support the civic institutions that are so important, and the rule of law that is so important for society. So that's just a thought that really came out of the questions that I was given.
So this kind of brings up rights, privilege, and entitlement. And you mentioned the privilege and entitlement. How do you see that in the mix of the power of well-being and being able to step into a better human environment?
This whole question of entitlement and rights is something which I think is really it's a touchy issue. I realize that because we all have rights, but I think it's important to remember we also have obligations. With every right comes an obligation, because if we exercise a right in a manner which benefits us, it may well do the opposite to someone else. And so I think that we have to get that balance in terms of saying rights are really important, and we need to hold on to our human rights, rights of free speech. The rights to have the democratic elections are critical, but we also have to recognize that each time we exercise a right, someone else is disadvantaged or can be disadvantaged, and so I think that comes back to reciprocity, is that we need that balance, that if we inflame a situation because I may say, well, look, I've got the right to rubbish somebody because this is my opinion.
Right.
If it damages someone's reputation or someone's well-being, then that is not a right I should be able to, or I should exercise if it's going to hurt someone.
Sure.
So I think that, and this is a real, I suppose it's it's a pressure point in free societies, is that we do have this right of free expression, and as
long as it's not aggression, I mean, you can say pretty much anything, but don't get physically aggressive or abusive. And we should be tolerant of that. You know what? I may not believe what you're saying, but my gosh, you've got the right to say it.
That's right. And I think in terms of personal discourse, what I think we have to do is we have to celebrate differences.
Absolutely. And I would offer that, and let me ask you this, do you experience a level of psychological safety and intellectual humility in the work that you do? And Definitely. Then how you present that in your public?
Definitely. It's a deliberate decision I've made to be respectful and to not attack other people. But that's also part of my training, my legal training. I've been taught to do that, and we're taught as very young lawyers, don't attack your opponent, attack their argument. And I think that if we could all learn to do that, is to say, well, look, I don't disagree, I don't agree with your view, but look, I realize that you're a good person and you mean well, but I think you're wrong. I think your argument's wrong. I think you're a good person,
right?
And I think that's so important in terms of our ability to communicate and to to disagree, without being disagreeable.
Which is the tough, because a really tough process because of two things. One, you arrive at the table with two different dictionaries, and you're speaking and listening from your own.
Yes.
And it's kind of like the fifth principle of 7 habits for highly successful people. Seek first to understand, then be understood. Yes. All we want in most cases is to be understood.
Yes.
We don't, give a flying leap of what the other person is trying to say, as long as we're getting our point across. Well, yes. How do you express the need for stepping back and learning really what the other person is saying before entering into that argument? And I say argument not in the argument sense, but in the the law sense.
Yeah, I do try and understand. I do try and understand their position, but I also.
How would you explain that process to another?
Well, what I try and do first off is to actually understand what their motivations are, and what their starting point is, and the information that they're relying on. And I think this is a skill that lawyers have, is they are good at actually looking at context. Mm-hmm. And I think context is king. If you can understand that someone is pushing a particular agenda, you can then deal with it on the basis that their starting point is identified, and you can say, well, I think that if you actually analyze the information you're relying on, it's not exactly as you think it is. And if you can get them to actually look at their to check their assumptions, and maybe go back and look at them. I think that's the way you can turn people to your point of view. But
or
you have to
at
do it.
least a different point of view. It may not be yours,
Yes.
but they may at least release a little bit of the lock that they have on where
Yes.
they're at.
To open their minds a bit to actually look at your point of view. But you have to do the same with them.
Oh, absolutely. That's
You-
the reciprocity that
Exactly.
you're speaking of, that you've got to be willing to do, and in some respects, to do it first, what
Yes.
you're anticipating from the other.
Exactly.
Right? You've got to be the example to them. Doesn't always work, you
No.
know, immediately. And yet there's this art of conversation, if you will,
Yes.
that you engage, kind of like what you're talking about, where you begin to kind of peel back the layers of the onion and say, hey, you know, how about looking at this? And you're not attacking or aggressing on the person. You're looking at either the words or the behavior.
Yes.
And how to unpack that so that they may understand, because they may not know their motivations, right?
Yes. Exactly.
It may be something that's deeply held and something that they've never had anybody confront them on. And so, you know, they got triggered and blew up and ended up in court over it.
Yes, that's right. Or you could get them to actually to read a bit wider on the topic, is to say, well, look, you've based that view on so and so. Why don't you listen to this podcast, or just go on and listen to any podcast from this particular person, and just get a different feel for it, and then let's talk about it again.
Sure.
I'm doing that at the moment with a family member of mine. Is I'm trying to convince him about what I'm talking about in my book, and he's trying to convince me of a different view. And I've listened to a number of podcasts at his insistence, and we're going to talk about it. And that's cool, because, you know, he's trying to influence me and I'm trying to influence him.
Sure, sure. Is there a possibility of you both discovering a similar starting point, an anchor of where you both agree upon it, and then, you know, look at where that deviance hurts?
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will, that there'll be common ground as we can agree that, look, that we're all on the same page here, but there's a bit of stuff around the edge, and that's fine.
Yeah. And it's great. Now, do you start conversations, consultations, the things that you do as a barrister with that, hey, let's start with something, you know, simple and replete with truth?
Yes.
And go from there as far as how we can weave through and navigate the labyrinth of
Yes.
how we find resolution.
Yes, well, I think I would, the only point I would make there is I try and deal in facts rather than truth, because we all have our own truths. And I think that one thing I try and do is to say, well, look, let's agree on what the facts are here, and what you make of them is up to you. And I think a lot of the problems we have in our discourse is that we all have our own truths, and they are really an integral part of our being. And if once you attack a person's truth, you attack them personally. And I think that is why it's far better to say, Zen, well, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but isn't it right that this is the case factually, and can we agree on that at least? As soon as I attack, as soon as I question your truth, I'm attacking you. And I think that's what we have to avoid.
I think that's reasonable. I also wonder if there is some integral truth in just being human that we share.
Yeah.
Right. And,
yeah.
and I think, you know, going back to the inner side, and that there are some things that we can agree on are true. You know, we're
Yes.
living, breathing human beings that that at least don't want to aggress or be aggressed upon.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, no, I agree. I think there are some universal truths.
Mm-hmm.
And could I just on that point, I'm having a very interesting discussion with an old university friend of mine in South Africa at the moment on Facebook, funnily enough. And he's involved in a local business organization, and he's written recently about the concept of Ubuntu. And I'm not sure if you've heard of Ubuntu.
I'm very familiar. I actually have a good friend, Michael Tellinger, who promotes Ubuntu
Yes.
around the world.
Yes. Well, it's an incredibly powerful
Also South
concept.
African.
Yes. I mean, I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and Ubuntu was completely foreign to us because, you know, we were applying the white man's rule, and the black man's rules didn't even come into consideration. But it's a powerful concept of I am because we are.
It's community.
Yes, it's the same. It's a humanist principle, and we have a very similar. And this is what I'm talking to my friend about at the moment. Is that we're very similar concept in New Zealand in Maori principles, and it is what is important. It is the people, the people, the people.
Right. Now, speaking of indigenous philosophy, which was what science used to be called until the 14th century, about that, there's the three brain philosophy, the first, second, and third brain. And you're probably well familiar with this, right? The first brain's the gut, the second brain's the heart, and the third's your head.
Okay.
And we as Westerners, for lack of a better term, process from the head down.
Yeah.
And indigenous Aborigines process the opposite direction because they feel that the solar plexus, the gut, are where they're connected universally through the vibrations of everything around them.
Yeah.
And so they have that sense first and then bring it up and process it and maybe,
Yes.
you know, apply that Taoist principle. Is it desirable
Yes.
or undesirable? You can feel that in your heart center. To feel
Yes.
good or, you know, ouch. And then take it up to the head where you make better choices and decisions as to what to do about it.
Yes. Yes. No, that's very, I didn't realize that, but it's very interesting because I think I do write a lot about the indigenous people in New Zealand. And
so we had an apocalyptic moment there, eh?
Yes, exactly. But I think that the point is that what really strikes me is that the Maori are connected to the land. The land is where the land nurtures them and their ancestors. And they are very, very strong about that. And whereas I feel that I'm really landless. I mean, my father was Irish. He went to South Africa after the war. I left there when I was, you know, in my mid-teens. So I've moved, he moved, you know, and when people say, well, where are you from? I say, well, how far back would you like to go? And that in a way I do feel a bit landless.
So let me ask you this. Let's take a different perspective and maybe you'll change your opinion of being landless. Where did your body come from? How did it grow? What grew it? And where did it come from? The earth.
The earth and the sea.
Right? So
Yes.
location doesn't matter in that respect.
Yeah.
And I really think that's what the indigenous kind of present, although, you know, they're not, some tribes are nomadic, but most of them aren't today.
Yes.
And yet there's this reverence for the earth because it does give them life.
Yes.
And it gives us life, but we've disconnected from that awareness because we're used to the fast food, going to the supermarket, you know. Sometimes we have gardens, but most of the time we get our produce in the supermarkets, right? So we've lost that continuity of the progression of the elementals and the minerals and nutrients that come from the planet that end up being our
Yes.
body.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you entirely. I think we've lost that connection, and the indigenous people have a much stronger sense of that connection with the land.
By chance, did you explore that or hint at it in your book, or was that something that was yet undiscovered?
No, I have addressed it. I have addressed it in the sense that the Maori worldview is really we've done almost a complete circle in New Zealand, and we've now started to recognise that our indigenous people have so much to offer wider society, and that's part of the renaissance of New Zealand as a diverse country.
That's happening in a lot of first world countries, actually.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
starting to look at that and recognize, oops, we missed something.
Missed something important, and we disregarded them as people that needed to be colonized and Christianized, instead of saying they've got so much to offer us. Yeah, yeah.
Pure and simple.
Yeah.
And we don't need that anymore.
No.
What we need is the opposite. And also, you know, from your perspective, learning how to either enforce the existing laws that eliminate aggression or adjust them to the point where there's no room for it from the government level down.
Yes.
And I think that's possible to do.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
It's even interesting. I read it was the first paragraph of the California Constitution, and it pretty much says that, you know, no aggression, leave people alone, and I can't. But it was so evident in it, and I would imagine other state constitutions in the United States are like that, and maybe even and the Constitution itself for the United States, and maybe other similar documents for other countries have that vocabulary and wording in it, but no enforcement of it, or no, and again, the enforcement would tend to be aggression, no acquiescing to the reality of its truth for each individual and the collective. So do you see that happening?
Well, I mean, I think we're aware of it, and we are trying to address it. I refer to it as violence, more in the sense of violence, and we are trying to address family violence and the what I call, you know, the four horsemen of deprivation. And one of them is violence, and the other is interactions with the justice system are the two worst things that anyone can experience. And I'm sure it's the same in the States, is that once you get into the criminal justice system, your life has changed. And I think that,
and recidivism has been high as well. I wrote a business plan for a model school and village after I taught high school for almost a decade, various conditions, locations, and types of schools. And in doing the research for it, it was amazing how many youth who were we call them at risk, end up in detention or jail or behavioral health centers and things of that nature, because there's no foundation for them.
Yes. I mean, one of the I discussed, and there's quite a lot in my book about Sir Bill English, who was the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and he was the finance minister before he became Prime Minister. And he spoke about the $1 million kids, and he said these are children who grow up in underprivileged families, normally a single mum who can't afford to send them to school. They suffer truancy. They get into trouble when they're still very young, join gangs. And he said that if we could just keep those kids in school, and often it means keeping the mother in school, in other words, getting the mother to finish school so she can get a job. And he said that we will save $1 million per kid.
No doubt.
And it is the solution is, and if the resources were just channeled to you know, a very small number of people, we would solve a huge number of problems. And and that's why I spoke about getting the resources to the right people in a timely manner is the key to solving our problems.
Well, your mates next to you in Australia actually began the notion of holistic education. And that being addressing the mind, body, spirit of each child, which we don't do.
No.
And there are some schools like Waldorf and oh gosh, that's one of them, Montessori. Those types of school nurture the kids in that respect. And one of the things that I noticed is that we don't assess the kids for their aptitude and proclivities when they're younger, and nurture those, and instead we put them in a box and teach them what they think what we think they need to know, and then get them to regurgitate that. But it really, and then we wonder why they get tired of that and drop out. And this is what I'm talking about, in the educational system, the kids aren't interested. So why would they go? They lose interest because there's nothing for them. There's no real learning that takes place or nurturing. And what they're seeking is belonging. And that's why they join the gangs.
And the gangs are a big problem here.
Oh, they are here too.
A massive, massive problem. And the thing is, they have a sense of belonging
that can't be found otherwise for them in their locations, because the schools aren't giving it. And you know, and they're based, I don't know how they are there, but I know our educational system was designed by a guy by the name of Dewey back in the 40s, basically to provide factory workers. Because it was in the industrial, we were in the middle of the industrial age, and that worked well. And some of it has adjusted to now, and some colleges and universities, and maybe, you know, in some high schools, the charter schools now are vastly different in addressing that. So kudos for them, yet we've got a long way to go.
Agreed, totally. So it's the $1 million baby problem, and you would have many millions of them, but the investment is actually a tiny fraction of what the social cost is to society in the long run.
Very true. It's like holistic or alternative medicine or homeopathic medicine, you know, where a little bit avoids the greater later.
Exactly, and they don't have to cut you up and send you to intensive care.
Right, preventative. You know, preventative, you know, psychological trauma that could happen to kids if we teach them how to get along. You know, the old kindergarten rules. Right? Don't throw sand. Don't hit each other. Be nice. Right? Share. You know, and we learn that as kindergartners, or most of us do. And yet, as we grow up, we have this kind of different systems that's supplanted over the top of that and diminishes that natural being that we are, and pushes us into areas that we feel out of control in, and so the aggression takes place, the aberrant behaviors, the things that end up in court, those kinds of things. So on a practical level, what kinds of things can or instances can you offer that would help an individual kind of step back and take a look at things? What are some of the processes that you offer to others when they ask? Of course, you know, the thing about teenagers, you can't give them the answers until they ask the questions, otherwise it doesn't matter. And I think adults are the same way.
What I've done is in the book, I've got some annexures at the end which actually have tables of issues and possible solutions and resources that are available for people to access. And that would be, say, in the area of mental health, is you know, a couple of practical steps. And the first advice is very simple: is reach out, talk to someone, That's the most important thing. Talk to a friend. And then I've provided details of organizations that provide counseling, outreach services and things like that. So that's an example. So it's a self-help book in the sense that for people that, or have substance abuse problems, family violence, intimate partner violence, how to reach out. And there are a number of grassroots organizations that allow people from different ethnic groups as well to reach out to someone who can understand their problem. And it's real grassroots stuff that I've tried to focus on, because there's a fabulous organization which was set up by a young Polynesian man who'd seen his mother beaten up over the years by his father. And she died recently of cancer, and he set up this foundation allowing Polynesian people to actually get help. And it was really in honor of his mother, who just put up with this ongoing violence because she wanted to keep the family together. She was, and that's so typical. So it's those sort of organizations that I think people can reach out to. And another one is one of our former All Blacks, our rugby player, who was one of our top rugby players. Turned out he had mental health issues, and he covered it up for years. And eventually he's now come out and said, look, I was a mess. And he's set up his own business now with an app which allows people to interact. So it's these sort of small initiatives which I think are important.
Very much so, and available when you look. That's the challenge right. Is to get over yourself and look. Yeah. And all the details are in the book. So I'd like to think that it's a practical book that people can pick up. And I think one of the concerns I have is that maybe I've tried to solve too many problems in one book. But anyway, there's no harm in trying. Yeah, well, isn't that the nature of a barrister? It's like one problem is not enough. I got to solve many, right? Well, Clive, I really appreciate this conversation. We went a lot of different places and yes. Shared a lot of wisdom, and we had some apocalyptic moments too. Yes, we did. Great yes. For both of us. Yes. And I know the same for our audience. So thank you very much for your time and your energy and your efforts to help make the world a better place. Thank you very much. And it's been a great pleasure. Thank you. And namaste and in la catch. Thank you so much for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I will see you next time.